Welcome to the Lean Out Your Business podcast, a show dedicated to helping entrepreneurs accelerate business growth and simplify success. I'm your host, Krista Grasso, and I've been working with businesses for more than 2 decades to help them lean out and optimize what's working while eliminating anything that's not adding value. So if you are ready to get more time back in your day, more profit in your business, and to do business differently, growing and scaling on your terms, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Lean Out Your Business podcast. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Amy Collette. I got the pleasure of meeting Amy when we got pulled together into the Brilliant Business Coalition. So we host a live over on LinkedIn once a month where we talk about all sorts of interesting topics. And a fellow business peer brought together 5 incredible business owners, and Amy is one of those incredible business owners. So I'm super excited to introduce you to her today. And today we're going to be diving in and talking about writing a compelling book and really unleashing your impact, which is something that she specializes in and is incredibly skilled at. So if you have been thinking of writing a book, if you already have a book and would like to get better reach from it, we are going to dive in and talk all about impact, all about book, and all about just highlighting the amazing, incredible entrepreneur that you are. So Amy, welcome. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you for the beautiful introduction.
Yeah, I'm going to tell people a little bit more about you, and then we can get into all the good stuff.
Okay.
So if you do not know Miss Amy, she is a writing coach and author, a speaker, and a crystal clear voice for intentional change. She is the founder of Unleash Your Inner Author, where she inspires audiences to make the kind of impact they desire by teaching them how to deeply connect through the power of story. So I thought that was actually a really great place to start.
Yeah.
And we hear story so often. We hear about the importance of story so often. So why do you think that story is so powerful or so transformational or something that we should be thinking about as business owners?
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that, Krista, that we hear a lot about story, but what the heck is it and why do we care? Right? So, story is the way that humans have connected throughout time, right? And the wonderful thing about story is that it helps us resonate with another person. You know, whether you're telling a story or whether you're listening to a story, you're having a shared experience, right? So I learned this when I told a really, really vulnerable story. And I saw people crying and I saw people, putting their hands on their heart. And because they were connecting with me, but it was because they connected with something personal for them in my story. And that is the real magic and power of story.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's the story a lot of times is about us, but it's not. A really good story is about us, but the person hearing it sees themselves in it, sees something in it that is so resonant for them. And I think sometimes when we are trying to figure out what stories to tell, it can be really hard to know which ones are going to have that effect and which ones just feel like we're talking about ourselves. So, how do you know and how do you make that distinction?
It's a great question, Krista. And I hear that from almost every author that I work with, because at some point, when you're writing a whole book and you're telling a lot of your own personal stories, at some point you get a little tired of your own stories. And you say, isn't everybody else going to be tired of my stories? And that's where you come back to that connection piece over and over again. Because you can tell a story that maybe is just a brag story, it's a success story, and you want to tell those in your business for sure. You want to share how you help people find success. And you also want to share those struggle stories, right? Some of those more vulnerable, like, wow, I learned this because I did it wrong the first time, and I learned all the hard lessons and I had to come around to figuring out the right way, and that now it helps people do something. So those stories, everybody can relate to the success stories and the didn't quite get it right the first time stories, or those stories of just having a hard time and learning resilience from it and drawing the gifts from it that come not in the moment of that traumatic or difficult time, but later when you get to take those lessons from it.
Yeah, it's such a good point because I feel like there are lessons in everything, and I share a lot on the podcast, but I feel like these past few years have been a roller coaster and a half with all sorts of sucker punches left and right. And it's
Right.
learning to look for the silver lining in everything, look
Mhm.
for the positive in everything that I feel like has kept me so positive throughout even the most challenging experiences. And I find when I share those stories, that's what people tend to resonate with the most. Not the thing that happened, but the what you took away from it or how it ended up leading to some kind of change in your life or in your business. And they've universally changed my business model, and changed me in every scenario.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, Krista. And so I learned that, and I'll give you a little example of what I'm talking about by sharing a really short little story. But when I wrote my first book, The Gratitude Connection, it was about taking that silver lining out of a really hard time. So what came out of a difficult time for me was my gratitude practice and that sense of positivity that comes with practicing gratitude every day. It changed everything for me, starting at the really foundation of how I woke up and went to sleep every day, and how I felt and how I was able to show up in the world. And I call it the connection because it connected me back to myself. And telling that story, everybody's gone through some kind of hard time, whether it's in their family, their business, friendships, whatever it is, their experience. They've gone through some bumpy time, and to see how to get out of that and to move forward is connects them back to themselves, and to the wider world and their own relationships. So that's just a little example of that kind of resiliency that comes out of hard times, and we've all been through that with the pandemic.
Oh yeah. It's so interesting as you were telling that story. Again, I heard my own story in it. So the sign of a really great story.
Yeah, okay,
But
so share if you want to share what it brought up for you. That would be really awesome.
yeah, so I would say probably the most challenging thing that's ever happened to me. It wasn't breast cancer. It wasn't all of these things that you would think would be like the thing that you feel like you can't get through. But it was the loss of my dog, like literally the loss of my dog.
Yes.
He went outside and I never saw him again. And to this day, I don't know what happened to him.
Oh
And he was my
no.
best friend in the entire world. Like
Hmm.
I loved that dog more than anything. And as someone who does not have kids, he was very much my child.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was such a disruptive thing that it changed everything in my life. Every routine I had had for 14 and a half
Yes.
years were out the window. Everything that I did, the way I thought, the way I approached my day, everything
Yes.
completely and entirely shifted in that moment. And as much as it was the most challenging thing that's ever happened, it also really brought me back to myself. It
Mhm.
really brought me back to focusing more on me instead of focusing so externally. I changed a lot in my business. I realized how much in my business and my business model I wasn't actually happy with. I was just kind of doing it because I'd always done it, but it was that break in routine, that hard stop that made me stop everything. And then I had to really intentionally look at what I was going to reintroduce. And some of those things I didn't want to introduce anymore. I started journaling. I started doing like just such deep self discovery. And it just set me down this entire path. And my life over these past few years looks really different than it probably would have had that not happened.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, how many people can relate to a loss that just absolutely throws them off their rails? You don't know it's going to happen. It's something that you can't anticipate. that is going to happen or how you're going to respond to it. Such a learning experience. It's painful as hell.
Yep. But like we said, silver lining, right, is even
Yeah.
in the most painful and the most challenging things,
Yeah.
there is something to be taken away from it. And I think it's so powerful when we share those things, because a lot of times we can feel like we're going through things alone, or our story isn't going to actually be impactful or helpful to someone else. And so how does that all come together with writing a book and choosing to be an author and choosing to intentionally tell stories, whether they're ones like the ones you and I just talked about, or even stories about the positive things and the mistakes that we make in our business journey? Like,
Right.
how does that all tie in? How is that so important?
Yeah, I think mostly what I find when I work with authors is they can't keep from telling this story, because not just because it's a great story, but because they know it will help other people. You know, that's what really makes that compelling story. Like, so if you're wondering, should I tell this story or this story, or what's my book going to be about? You know, all of us have been through some kind of transformation that's changed our lives. Like you just described exactly that kind of transformation. Now, could the lessons learned from that experience of yours help other people? Absolutely. you know, and that's where I was when I wrote The Gratitude Connection. I felt like it was selfish to keep the stuff that I had learned to myself, because I knew I was also a life coach at that time. So I was using these techniques on other people and seeing huge changes through really small habit changes. And so I thought, I got to let the world know about this. I got to get this out there. And so that's really, when you're wondering if you should tell a story, ask yourself, when I tell this story, what's the response that I get? Do people gasp? Do they get it? Are they relating? Are they crying? Are they having some kind of emotional response? You're hitting them right here in the heart. And so when you can tell that kind of story and you can make that kind of change in someone's life, then that's a pretty powerful yes for telling that story.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so I'm so curious. I'm curious with all the work that you do with authors, right? For everyone who's decided to write a book and to be an author, there are probably a million more who thought about it and did not make the decision to say yes. And so what do you think keeps people from moving forward with a book? Is it story? Is it something else? Like I'm so curious to hear what you see.
Yeah. I was curious too, and I thought I knew, Krista, but last year I was encouraged by a coach to do some market research and talk to people who are in that category of who want to write a book but have not. They may be carrying it around for 10 years and they still haven't written the book. And so I got to talk to these people over and over again. I heard the same things. And it was mostly, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to start with this. It feels overwhelming. So that's probably the biggest one. The second most common one is what I call fear dragons. And those are the doubts, the insecurities, the barriers that come up with writing a book. And they may come up before you write the book and keep you from writing it, or they may come up during the process, which often happens. And so that's part of what my latest book is about, is really how you overcome those barriers, because they're really the things that keep us from doing anything and opening up our greatness, right? Whether it's writing a book, writing your screenplay, making a film, whatever it is, going on that huge trip, whatever it is that's really your thing, that's you're kind of scared to death of, something is keeping you from that, and it may be an old story in your head. So doing the thing, whether it's writing the book or going on the big trip, is going to help you work through that. And so those are the things that I see that are the big barriers that they're very simple. They don't know where to start, or if they're just something's keeping them scared and small.
Oh, so powerful. And it's funny as you were saying that, I was thinking for a long time, I had a business where I helped people create planners. I have a 90-day planner. So I
Yeah.
would help other people take their signature framework and turn it into a planner, a workbook, or a journal. And I did a lot of work with people on it. And some people would come in at the idea stage and I'd help them turn it into a product. But I can't tell you how many people came in with it done. They came in with it pretty much done. It was either completely done or it was close to done, and they were too scared to actually print it or too scared to actually sell it. And I'm like, you have this amazing signature program. You have this amazing thing, and you've done all the really, really hard work. And to me, that's like the last part. That's the easy part. It's like you already did the big thing, just print it and sell it. But it was that part that to them held them back because it
Yes.
was the but what if it's good enough, and there's so many planners out there and there's so many journals, and does the world really need another one, and what if and what if, and it was all of that self-doubt that came up. And I'll be honest, I didn't see that coming. I thought I was going to get people who had the idea and didn't know the steps. I never expected to get so many people who had it almost done and were just too
Wow.
kind of letting the self-doubt and the fear get in the way from actually moving it forward.
Yes. Those, and number one among those fears is imposter syndrome,
Mm.
and that can show up in a lot of ways. And, you might know that you have an insecurity, that you think you're not good enough, but it might show up as procrastination, which might be a lot of what you were saying, where people got it done, but they like couldn't pull the trigger to make it happen because they didn't think it was good enough. But in their mind, they're calling it, oh, I'm just procrastinating. Oh, I'm just really busy. Oh, I've got all these other things going on. But it's really what I call that fear dragon circling around, telling you stories in your ear. And, so what they need is someone like you to help them work through that fear to get them over the hump and willing to share it with the world.
Or someone like you to take all of their magic and their experiences and their stories and turn it into a really incredible book.
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk about, right, because there's a lot of books out there, and some of them end up wildly successful. Some of them just end up, unfortunately, collecting dust, whether it's digital or physical.
Right.
And so, what in your mind makes for a really compelling book and a really successful book?
Yeah, I think, so it takes a lot of things to make a successful book, and that is clarity, structure, a good process to be able to write it, great editing, design, all those things make a really great book. But how do a lot of books have that. And so and they still sit on a shelf, right? Without any real action. So the thing is, I think there's a common myth out there about once you write the book, you put it out there and they will come, right? Well, Amazon has millions of books on it. It's hard to find that book unless you keep the conversation going, you know? So it's really the author's responsibility to keep the excitement and keep the story flowing. And speaking of story and telling stories, the most successful authors I see, whether they're authors I work with or the authors out there in the world, are the ones out there speaking. This is for nonfiction books in particular. So the most successful authors that I work with are the ones out there being visible, getting their story out there again and again and again. They haven't just written it and put it on the shelf for themselves. They keep the excitement going by getting on stage, by visiting groups, by doing workshops and courses and things like that. And it keeps the energy moving, right? And keeps more people finding out about the book. So even sometimes in a small speaking engagement, if it's the right people in the room, they're going to leave that with a book and they're going to tell everybody about it. So that word of mouth marketing really makes a huge difference as far as I can see. There's always the social media strategies and all that kind of stuff, but just continuing to talk about the book and the concepts that you believe so deeply in is what helps that book continue to have a life and to serve more people.
Oh, yeah. When I think about the books that I have purchased, it's either someone recommended it, and so I get the book that way, or
Yep.
most of the time, I heard that person on a podcast and thought, I want to know more. And so I end up getting the book, or I saw them speak. I was at an event in October and I bought the book of every one of the speakers that I resonated with because it's what you do. And then you leave and you say, why did I buy this as a physical book? Now I have to pack it and bring it home with me, but
Right.
it's what you do.
It's what you do. And that's the thing. We often don't think of certain things as speaking, but podcasting is speaking. It's such a great way to get exposure. I got a call from a woman who said, "Hey, I'm listening to you on a podcast right now." And I was really interested. So I just, I called your contact information and started the conversation. So that was really fun. And your own stages, your own workshops and happy hours, events of any kind, whether they're online or in person, are speaking and getting the word out there, getting it, planted in someone's head or physically in their hand, and just keeping that energy going.
I think that's so, I'm so happy that you shared that because a lot of times I think people think of the launch and the launch event, and they'll do this very focused promotion period around the launch of the book.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned that, I'm like, how many people have I seen that really keep on promoting it and keep talking about it over the long term? I feel like it drops off quite a bit. Do you think it does, or do you see that it does?
Yeah, and I think it's something that's been kind of taught to us by traditional publishers
Mm.
because that's where they focus. They focus on a 3-month period after the book is officially launched where they're doing a lot of marketing and there's a book tour and all that kind of stuff. But most of the time, when we're writing a nonfiction book, that book can have legs for a long time. That content is timeless, right? We're focusing on changing your life. That can happen at any moment, whether it's now or 10 years from now. So our books have a real shelf life of a long time. It's not the political thing of the moment or something that's super timely in the news. It's how to transform your life and be a happier person, or do something in your business, uh, take better care of your mental health. So those things can go on for a long time. And there's lots and lots you can talk about. So authors often forget that they have a book full of content that they've created that they can reuse in so many ways. Like even on TikTok, I've seen recently, authors are just reading short clips from their books. And these things are wildly popular. So there are a lot of different ways to keep the conversation going with your readers and with new readers all the time.
I love that. And so that is a great strategy for those who already have a book and maybe aren't seeing the results they want, or maybe the results have started to dip over time because maybe
Yeah.
they did do that big push and then kind of let it wane a little bit. But
Yeah.
how about for the person who's listening and says, I really want to write a book. I've been thinking about it forever. Maybe they've even got it partially written, but they have not yet actually really fully committed to putting this book out into the world. What are some of those getting started or things to be doing steps that they can think of?
Yeah. So the steps are really all outlined in my new book. That's why I wrote it, is so that people can get started. It's called Unleash Your Impact. So there are a lot of writing programs out there that focus on writing your book in a weekend or writing it in a week or whatever. And what that doesn't leave space and time for is reflection and clarity. And that's what I've seen people be so much more successful with is if they spend some time getting clear on what they're doing first. And I compare it to, this is sort of a silly analogy, but if you're going to build a house, you don't just start banging boards together, right? And trying to stand them up. You have a plan, you kind of make your dream come true on paper first. and then flesh it out with all the beautiful design and stuff that goes into your house. And you have to build a foundation first. So the foundation for your book is getting clear on what your mission is, understanding who you're writing the book for. It's not for everyone. It's for the people who need your message most, who you can serve most. And then getting clear on yourself as an author. What are your goals? Do you want to speak? Do you want to do courses? Do you want to get on podcasts? Do you, how do you want to continue to get this message out into the world as an author? And so you can do many launches, you can do many book signings. You don't have to do it just all the month the book comes out. You can really do anything you want. The world is your oyster, really. So, and then you can create from all that information that you've gotten real clear on, you create an outline. It's your framework, just like you would have for building a house. So now only then do I have people start writing. Once they've gotten really clear, they've given themselves an outline, which I call your roadmap. Now they can follow their map. They know where the book starts. They know where it ends. They know what stories are relevant to tell in that book and how it's going to help people, how they can bring it into their own lives. So that's I think really the most important part is getting clear first and then writing.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And that is the way that I approach everything. So I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I'm nodding my head as you're going through all of those steps.
But
So
not everyone's like us. They just, people like to jump in, or we just have this another myth. We think, oh, we should just be able to sit down and write a book. No problem, right? But you see so many people don't get it done when they do it in a vacuum by themselves.
tell us a little bit more about your book and where people can find it, and a little bit more about the work that you do with your clients.
Yeah. So, my book starts with the same thing that I start with people on in my coaching program. And that is all that real clarity, that foundational work. Because I think it's so important that, I want everybody to know that that's where you should start your book. So you can find my book at unleashyourimpactbook.com. And it's a low cost book. I want it to be accessible to everybody. And just because you don't really write a book by yourself, not knowing how to do it. There is a process, there's a plan, there's a way to organize it, and you can have all kinds of resources that help you do that. So that's where I start with getting that clarity, and then helping people all throughout the book write, become stronger writers, really be able to tell those stories without telling every single detail. We want to keep people turning the page and being excited about the content and learning something about themselves always. So there are definite ways to do that and to balance that. And people really get in a flow of doing this. And I'm a big believer also in templates. I'm sure you are too, Krista.
For sure.
So we have book templates, we have chapter templates so that people have a guideline for themselves of how to write. And then when you have a cadence, you've probably seen this in books, it can be kind of subtle, but where every chapter is organized in a similar fashion. It builds trust in you as the author when you give a person the same kind of, I'm going to give this information to you in this way. And so that you can receive it, you can process it and take it into your life. And then I'm going to do the next chapter the same way. It's like this, really giving them this really nice, safe space to be in where they know what to expect and they keep turning the page because they like that. So that was a lot, Krista.
No, it's great. And I just want to say something so interesting about what you just shared is I talk to people about systems and structure a lot.
Mm,
And sometimes people push back against it. They feel like it can be a
yes.
little restrictive or a little
Mhm.
kind of confining. But the reality is, when you do that, when you have a structure like that, as you were sharing that, I'm thinking of books that I've read. And when an author does that, you don't notice the structure so much. It's just that you notice that you know what to expect and it becomes easy to read and easy to keep going. But I feel like when it doesn't exist, you notice it. You notice when it's you almost notice the absence of it instead of the existence of it because it's a little jarring. You're never sure. I find I sometimes will put a book down when I don't entirely know what to expect, and I don't do it consciously. It's just I kind of push against it a little bit more, whereas that structure makes it flow and makes it a lot easier to read. And I think you're right. It is that trust, but it's not even done, I think, at such a conscious level. It just I feel like you're gifting the reader if you follow the approach that you outlined.
Yes, it really is. It really is. I started out that way with making it that way so that it's easier for the author to write, right? It gives them a structure and a flow that they know and they get into the habit of doing it, right? But I started researching a lot of nonfiction books, and many are structured in that way where it does have a subtle structure throughout every chapter where they and so it just provides such a nice cadence, and it makes me think of the systems and structures and frameworks in your business, in the way you do things. It supports you as well as your clients or your readers. You know, that those structures are just, they're kind of a gentle little way to be held in that safe, secure space so that you don't have to think about it. It's just this underpinning. And when you do that for your clients or your readers, then you're giving them this little sort of invisible gift. It's just like good editing. You don't notice good editing, but you do notice bad editing, right? It's the
Mhm.
same kind of subtle experience. When it's not there, you notice it.
It's so true. All right. So tell us how you work with people outside of the work that you do in your book and share your website and the best ways that people can get in touch with you.
Yes. So you can always find me on the socials at with the name Unleash Your Inner Author, and that's the name of my website too, unleashyourinnerauthor.com. You can find all kinds of stuff about my coaching program. So I take people through group coaching programs or one-on-one programs where we teach a very that's that structure of how you go about writing your book in a way that you can actually get it done in a timely manner and in a really impactful manner so that it's not all over the place. It is well structured, it's well thought out. And then when you have that structure and that framework, then you can really pour your heart out. You can tell those vulnerable stories. You can make that deep connection that we talked about at the beginning with your reader. And that's all you really have to think about. And you don't have to worry about how am I going to put this thing all together at the end. So it gives you this really nice way to be able to present your information in a way that's going to serve your readers in ways that they will want to work with you later. You know, they'll want to take your courses and your workshops and follow you and really get the most that they can from the experience that you're providing in the book. That's what my goal is to make other people uh, make the impact that they want to make, because that helps me fulfill my mission of making an impact too.
Yeah, and I feel like that's so needed. It's just how nice to go through the experience with someone like you to guide instead of trying to make it up on your own or kind of fight all of that self-doubt and everything
Right.
that might come up along the way. So, all right, so there's one question that I'm kind of dying to hear your answer to. And that is how do you work smarter, not harder, and keep things lean in your business?
Yeah, I have this wise client who told me not long ago, she said, uh, every time you put in, you're doing something, think, how can I do this in a more simple way? How can it be simpler? How can it be simpler? So I have really taken that on as a mantra and have made simplicity my goal, because I can get a little too fancy, you know. Oh, I want to put this in place and this in place and launch this and that. And I've really dialed things back so that it's super easy for me to understand what's going on when and make it as simple as possible. So I like, just like the book writing process, really, I've tried to make it as simple as possible and emotionally supportive as possible. And so that's what I do for myself in my business too, is just keep it simple, keep it, and it just makes it all more fun and enjoyable if it's more simple and I don't have to think really hard about, wait, how did I do that last time? And so if it's streamlined, that makes me happy.
Yeah, you are completely and entirely speaking my language. So yes to that.
Not that I'm always perfect at it, Krista. I'm sure I could use a lot of help in that area, but that's my goal.
I love it. So any final tips before we wrap up the episode on how you can unleash your impact with a book?
Yeah. So, we talked about these fear dragons and things that pop up that can keep you scared or just make your voice not be heard. And so I have another quote from another client who he told me, and this sticks with me so powerfully: believe in the potency of your own experience.
That's good.
It's really good at, because sometimes we're shy about telling our stories or being vulnerable or just getting our message out there. But if it's, you've lived through these things, you have a unique perspective. So if you can just put a little more belief in the power of your own experience, then that will help you do great things.
Amazing. Amy, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you being on the show. I hope all of you listening got as much value out of this episode as I did. I will see you again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. If you have not yet taken our scalability assessment, I invite you to head to leanoutmethod.com/assessment and take our interactive assessment that's going to help you look at how simple, how sustainable, and how scalable your business currently is. It includes personalized recommendations of where to focus next to get your time back, to increase your impact, increase your profits, and ultimately step into your rich, fulfilled life. And finally, we'd love to see you inside our signature program, Simplify to Scale. You can head to leanoutmethod.com/ops to find all of the details on how we can help you uplevel your operations and get out of the day-to-day of your business.